You're listening to a 58 Ember production.
GIRLSCAMP, it's Girls Camp.
Ready?
I'm ready.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Girls Camp podcast. I'm your host, Haley Rawl, and today's guest is a big deal, you guys.
Okay.
Truly, the inspirational Kelsey Wells is joining us today.
Thank you.
Thank you for being here, Kelsey.
Well, it's a big deal for me to be here at Girls Camp. And I, as you know, am so honored, excited. Today is Haley's birthday.
It is my birthday.
It obviously won't be when this is published, but I told her when I figured that out, I puzzled it together and I was like, I am equally parts like horrified and honored that you're doing this and working on your birthday, but also that I get to spend time with you on your birthday. So I had to shout that out.
No, thank you for saying that. What a good birthday present. Get to sit down and talk about Mormonism with a cool, badass woman.
Oh, well,
what more could you want?
I'm ready. Let's do it.
By way of introduction, Kelsey, it's difficult to sum up what you do, but I'm going to try. Kelsey is a fitness, wellness, mental health influencer and advocate. You have your own series of workout programs called Power. Mm-hmm. You have a podcast, which is also a movement. I feel like that kind of sums it up better, called Redefine Fitness. Yeah. And you are also a wife, a mom,
I am.
And someone who left the Mormon church.
That's it.
Which is what brings us here today. Yeah. I am excited. How we're going to do this is we're going to walk through your story. And then you actually had people write in questions.
Yes.
We were just kind of talking through some of those questions. But there's some really phenomenal questions. And it's always really nice and also interesting to hear what people are intrigued by or what they want to know. Yeah. So we're going to kind of set some context with your story, and then we'll jump into those questions.
Whew, okay. I will give you the most nutshell version possible, just because most of the pieces I feel most passionate about sharing or that people want to know about, we will talk about during the questions. So basically, I left almost exactly a decade ago. I think it's coming up in weeks or months soon. And only one time have I ever publicly said anything about Mormonism, religion, and said, hey, I am an ex-Mormon, and this is part of my experience. And I did that almost 2 years ago to the day. It was June 22nd, 2022. And when I did so on my podcast, and I did so because I was just beginning my podcast, and that is my space to really dive into putting mental health at the forefront and reminding people that we are multifaceted beings, and physical, mental, emotional, spiritual health, they are not separate from each other, and they affect each other so much. And so I felt like before I vulnerably held space for other guests or shared my mental health journey, I wanted to be honest about the single most transformative piece of my life that put me in most of those places and through which I am who I am. And so I opened up and I shared on that episode. It's episode 3. It's called The Day I Died. And I shout that out because there is where you can hear the full in detail experience of the moment that I left, because it actually wasn't a moment for me, and all the things that led up to that, and also the mental place that it put me in and all of that. So I'm not going to get into that here. Yeah. But if you guys have listened to that and that led you here, or if you are listening to this now and are interested, all those details are going to be over there. So,
I will link it, so it's very easy to find.
Cool. Thank you. So now, after I did that, I've never had more, not only was it my most downloaded episode ever, but I've never had more, of everything, a lot of backlash, a lot of negativity, but also genuine questions and people reaching out saying, hey, me too, or being able to relate to some phase of my journey in some way and asking so many questions. And at the time, I honestly was not ready to speak to those or to answer them. I wasn't ready to talk about anything doctrinal or religious specific. And I am now. And I also felt like my platforms were not the right place to do that. And when I saw your page come up the first time, I knew, I just knew in my heart, I have to sit down with Haley. This is the platform that I feel is the right place to get into all of this. So here we are.
Honored. But thank you for that.
Yeah, of course. Thank you. What you're doing is so brave. And I think probably the people that listen understand to an extent, but really what you do and you choosing to do this is helping and healing so many people on a level that is so important. And it's incredible. It takes such strength to do this.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I was thinking as you were talking about when you first opened up those 2 years ago, there really is something so unique about faith journeys, because whether people relate directly because they've had a similar faith journey, they're just such a epitome of a human experience, right? And that's one of the reasons I'm so excited to talk to you, is because I feel like so much of your journey is really deeply impacted by your faith. And I think that that's true of anybody. But all that to say, I think it really intrigues people because we all can sense something about ourselves in someone else's faith journey, which I think is really beautiful. You said that you opened up a couple years ago and you talked about, that moment you left. Why do you now feel ready to get into more of these details, to talk about the doctrine, the religious side of it?
I don't know specifically why now. It's exactly what you said. I feel ready. Something has shifted. And for a very long time, in fact, when I was going through all of this, something that is so intensely private and personal was made public way before I was ready because of my public platforms that I was starting to have. And that exposed me to a lot of hate and negativity, not just from my real life circle and life and friends and family, but like Mormon people and leaders from all over the world reaching out, and not always in the kindest ways. And that was exceptionally difficult. So I put up huge walls. And I even told my team when I first signed with management, I was like, I will never speak to religion or Mormonism, period. I won't tolerate it. I never. And if I'm asked in person, I'm always honest and open, to the degree I feel is appropriate. But it was a hard no for me. And then, eventually everything shifted, and 8 years of healing later, I felt ready to share what I did 2 years ago. And something in the last couple of years, and especially in the last couple of months, has, I think, landed me in this space. Sharing what I do online is, I talk about like deep shit. Like I really do. And what I've learned is, like, I always have to ask myself the question, am I emotionally and mentally stable and able enough in this moment to authentically speak to this and weather the repercussions? And oftentimes the answer is no. So even if I want to open up about something, if I know that I'm not in a place where I can handle what comes from sharing things openly that matter to you, then I won't. And I know now that I am far enough along in my healing journey or grieving process or transformation or whatever you want to call the last decade, that I now am not speaking about these things from my anger or from my sorrow, but I can speak about those from a much more healed and peaceful place. Hopefully that will enable me to reach people in the depths of their sorrow or their grief or anger or heartbreak and help them a little bit. And I want to be so badly the voice that could have helped me 10 years ago.
That's so powerful. Thank you for that. I think that, I talk about this a lot on the podcast, but I always feel this kind of like domino effect of like, you went through this before I went through it. And then the way that you open up about it, and then it just enables people to feel heard and then also feel empowered, right? To speak to these things that, to your point, can be very complicated for so many reasons to talk about. So thank you for that. Before we jump into the questions, like you said, we have some really good questions. So we want to get to there.
Oh, I guess I didn't really share my nutshell story, did I?
Yes. No, but that's great. I wanted to hear all of that.
Okay.
No, that was perfect. I wanted to hear all of that. So I'm so glad we went there.
Let me tell you really quickly, and then I talk for 10 minutes about something else.
You know what? That's why we're soul sisters.
Okay, so
so it goes.
I'll focus in here.
Yeah.
I was raised exceptionally Mormon. And I do want to say right out the gate, my parents are two of the most beautiful-hearted, incredible people. They are still active in the Mormon church, as are most of my family members, my extended family members. And I know without a doubt, and have never doubted, that they raised me the best that they could out of love. And I feel like I need to say that right up front, because I don't want anyone to get anything else that I might share confused with that. And even though it might feel conflicting, it's actually not. Both can exist. So that said, I was raised exceptionally devoutly Mormon. Didn't play with friends on Sunday. Personal prayer, personal scripture study, family prayer, family scripture study every day. And then like church on Sundays, your calling, your Wednesday commitments, which is either mutual or, Relief Society priesthood. And then obviously church weekly, go to the temple monthly, even once you were 12. All of the little things, we were absolute baseline, like norm. Very, very full on in all the ways that one might think.
Yeah.
So that's how I was raised in Utah. And I poured my whole everything into it. And from when I was very little, I really had a very strong testimony. Stronger, I think, and more fierce than like certainly most kids my age. Mm-hmm. Okay, let's try to skip ahead. So I fell in love with my husband. We were 17. And we knew immediately like we were each other's person. And now looking back, it's like we were always offended if people didn't like believe us or whatever. But of course, like now anyway, it's funny looking back. But
yeah, now you have the proof. You're like, see?
Yes. And I never would have spoken to him because he wasn't active. So he had been baptized, but he didn't grow up how I did. He had never read the Book of Mormon. He, didn't have his priesthood. Like he was not Mormon. And if I had known that, I wouldn't have dated him or really even been his friend, to be honest. And thank God I didn't. And it was actually like graduation night. He said that he was thinking about going to LDS Business College. And I was like, I'm so sorry. I didn't know that you were LDS. And he was my big secret crush literally for years. And so it was like the best day of my life. And anyway, we hit it off. We fell in love. I converted him. And that's a whole other story. And we dated for a year and 4 months because back then you had to wait till you were 19 to serve a mission still. Mm-hmm. So we graduated at 17. When he turned 19, he left on a mission to Mexico. I waited for him. When I say waited, like it was like waited. I didn't date anyone. I didn't kiss anyone. I didn't hold a hand. Like I didn't.
You locked your heart, as they say.
It was his.
Yeah.
And I wrote him letters. I actually wrote him a letter every day. And it was like my nightly journal kind of. And he would write me once a week because that was the rules. And then 6 weeks after he was home, we were married. And then little did I know, he's a huge truth seeker. I knew that. But things started unraveling for him pretty quickly. After we were married, he transferred to BYU. And it was actually in actual church classes where things started to like interest him or he wanted to learn more, really genuinely stoked that we knew the truth, right? But quickly he realized it wasn't what he and certainly what I thought that it was. And flash forward again, it came to a point where he shared that he couldn't continue to live inauthentically. And it was so shattering. He knew what that was, meant for me. And I hesitate, like I don't want to ever put words in his mouth to share his story, but basically it was, he didn't ever come to me with issues. He hid from me that he was struggling with the church because he knew me well enough to know he was very afraid of my mental state and what that would be if I ever found out, really.
That he was even struggling.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And anything that he was struggling with, right? So that day I remember feeling like this is literally my greatest fears coming true, period. And I just told him, it's okay. Like, I love you. Like, we love, like, it's okay. And I'm going to find your answers. Like, what's the issues? Like, let me know. We'll figure this out. Little did I know he'd been searching so sincerely for years already. But he said no. And he said, it's okay. Like if you, and I said, okay, I'll be in and you'll be out. And back then, especially like a decade ago, that was not
common at all.
And it was not like growing up how I was raised. That was like, there was a reason it was my worst fear, right? I was going to take my son to church and have him be taught that his dad's, essentially going to hell and all the other things that come with that. But it was a Sunday actually. And I remember going to church for the first time by myself. And I don't know how they knew, but a member of the bishopric actually pulled me aside, sat me down and said, hey, is it true your husband's struggling and leaving the church? And I was just like, I didn't even answer him. And he's like, and I was like, how would he even know, But he just said, look, I think that you need to consider leaving your husband if he leaves the church and I just remember that moment was really the only thing, and I'm not proud to admit there weren't other things that didn't sit wrong with me, and we can talk about that later, but that moment I just knew, I was like, whoa, you don't talk to God for me? Like, what? Like, Ryan is the best person I know, period. The best husband, the best father, my best friend. Like, my soul and my most spiritual experiences have been in regards to marrying him and our life together. And here's this stranger telling me to leave him because he's struggling with the church. And so I went home and I decided, and I didn't share this with Ryan either, I decided that I was going to find his answers. So I entered this phase of intense, obsessive preparation to be on my highest spiritual plane to find his answers. And after a couple of weeks of like a lot of fasting, a lot of prayer, no secular anything, like only reading obsessive amounts of scriptures, only listening to hymns and church music and all of these things, I sat down at my computer to figure out his answers. And I don't remember exactly what I typed in, but I clicked on the CES letter website and actually didn't even click on the real website. It was like a church apologist version. And like 20 something minutes later, I was on the floor under my basement apartment kitchen table having the biggest panic attack of my life. I felt like I couldn't breathe. I thought I was having a heart attack. I was in this free fall of like pain and fear and panic. And I remember, I don't know how long I was there, but I remember my son crying. He had been napping and he started crying and it like pulled me out. And I was like, I have to go take care of my kid. And I found out everything all at once. It was like being waterboarded with like, I always like to use the analogy of the Truman Show.
Yeah.
It's not usually this dramatic for most people, but for me, it was truly like in that moment, I found out my entire lie and therefore my entire identity was not what I thought it was. And I thought I was insane. And I experienced now through, healing and discussions with therapists and other things, I can see lots of people at different points in life suffer loss of identity for a big piece of them shifting or something. But in that moment, I suffered basically a complete loss of identity and sense of self, which is very dangerous mentally.
Yeah, especially in one single moment like that. It's
and
intense.
Rare to happen to someone. So yeah, it was horrible.
Yeah.
But 10 years later, here we are.
Yeah. Wow.
So, yeah.
I want to talk a little bit more about that moment before we get into the questions. And for anyone who doesn't know, who's listening, the CES letter is essentially a compilation of, it has historical facts. It has a lot of contextual facts about the Book of Mormon and about Joseph Smith and Brigham Young, founding prophets of the church. And it's basically a summary of all of the kind of holes in the logic of Mormonism.
I like to say, like, it really is a tip of the iceberg.
True.
Like, now I know.
Yeah.
It's like a tip of the iceberg overview of the major issues. Because I know people think it's very elusive. Like, well, what actually made you leave? What was it you found out? And it's like, if you go read that, you'll get a very tip of the iceberg vision into a broad range of what most people find out.
Yeah.
That is their shelf breaker. And I also think it's important to point out that it was written by a very faithful, devout returned missionary member to the church authorities, the general authorities, out of faith from a place of like, please help me answer these and work through this.
Yeah.
So
like, this is not making sense.
Yeah.
I want to ask, when you read that CES letter in those 20 minutes before everything crumbled, was it because all of that information was completely new to you?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
So you were just reading for the first time all at once these just inconsistency and issues.
Yeah.
And it just, you realized in that moment, it's not.
It was
what I
crazy,
thought.
Haley, because I was so, looking back, it's even hard for me to understand how, as a grown woman who people would think was normal, I was so, I know it's a harsh word, but honestly brainwashed to the point that I truly would never have ever looked at anything about the church that was not published by the church on the church official website. I was diligently taught not to.
Yeah, that's what they tell you to do.
That's actually a huge red flag waving, right? Like if you're buying a car or a vacuum even, and you want to read reviews and you're told, well, just only look at the ones that we publish on our website.
Yeah.
What? Like,
and you're evil if you
but
don't.
Yeah, but for me, when you're just raised from birth believing certain things and then you are a certain person, and it's like, I would have lived my whole life never. Yeah, like I didn't have any inklings of any of that until that moment.
Yeah, I think part of what's so fascinating about that moment for you is it seems like because you were so devout and so literal in your belief, it seems like it was either all true or it wasn't true.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah, absolutely. For me, it was very black and white.
Yes.
And I believed so wholly. I believed like, the natural man is an enemy to God. And I said like, okay, I'm trying to think of a better way to explain. I didn't have a sense of self-love or self-confidence that was real because my only sense of self at this point was my standing in the Mormon church. And I was fully living for the next life. Obviously, like my life, I understood, was a small part of the church. The church shouldn't be a small part of my life. And how lucky was I to know that and to understand that? And it was very all-encompassing, and I didn't have opinions on things because whatever the brethren said, point blank, that's what I believed. That's what I thought. That's what I said. Like I didn't think. And with decisions in my life, even, they say personal revelation, but it's like I couldn't make a decision. I couldn't get through a day without praying and like waiting for God to tell me in whatever way I thought he was telling me, or maybe he was, right? But so it was very much, this is true. And also there's the pillars, right? If Joseph Smith is a prophet, point blank, the Book of Mormon's true, vice versa. The priesthood, like it's this triangle of if one's true, they're all true. But also on the flip side, if one isn't what you know it to be, then they all aren't.
Yeah.
And in that moment, it was like, I like died that day, the woman I was and the woman that I was going to be, because it was all real. And then it was not.
Yeah.
Period.
I feel like there's a various spectrum, right, of how people engage with the Mormon faith. And I think that the more literal, devout, black and white thinkers like you, while many people could say, well, you just took it too literally, or you were more intense than most people are, but you were way closer to what the Mormon church was asking you to be than a lot of Mormons are, because ultimately what the Mormon church asks of you is exactly what you just described. It is, you believe everything.
Yeah, and it wasn't weird.
Yeah, that's literally like, you were the model Mormon. Yes, by thinking that way.
Blind faith is touted as like, I remember having FHE lessons, family home evening lessons about blind faith. What happens if you don't understand or you don't agree and the prophet says this? Well, you believe it and you're rewarded for that later, and you'll understand later.
And it's actually, a better show of faith the less you believe it. Or even worse, if you feel uncomfortable with it, but you still believe it and still do it, then that's
praised
the best thing you could be.
Yeah.
And to your point, it's just betrayal of self and intuition at so many levels. You said something in your episode on Redefined Fitness where you said, my life was not my own, and that's the way it was supposed to be. And I think you spoke to that a little bit, but I don't know. I just want to drive that home for anybody listening, because I think that, again, to that point, that's what they tell you, literally give up your life for this.
And they do it in a very tricky way, because they feed the ego while they're doing it, because they say your life is not your own. It's part of this grander, bigger plan, but you are, because you are in the fold. I was born into the covenant. I was one of God's most chosen, devout children. And so it's like, I'm so strong and important. And I had mental health challenges and things from early like girlhood. And I was just always taught like, well, Satan's working really hard on you because you're really special to God and Heavenly Father, like they would say it differently, but essentially it was like, they tell you, I fully believed like my life wasn't my own. And it's very dangerous, because now I understand that they take, and this is something I think is really important. And I'm not saying this out of any sense of disrespect to anyone who is still in the Mormon faith, but doctrinally they take, and I hope it doesn't feel this way for practicing Mormons, but they take the most intrinsic, sacred, innate pieces of you, your joy, your eternal being, what you are, where you came from, your body, your sexuality, being with your family after death. They take all of these things and they hold them and own them and say, if you jump through all these hoops and live this one way, then you get those back. You can feel joy, real joy, but only if all of this, and then you can have that. And now I understand, no, those things exist and I'm worthy because I am. Like, your worth is innate, and it does not and it cannot change based on your or anyone else's ability or inability to see it, or if you mess up, or how you worship. That's not real. And it's exceptionally freeing to understand that. But that's why Mormonism is so dangerous, because they strip all of those things away and then say families are together if, etc.
Amen. Yeah. I think that that's what's so complicated about this, right? Is that it is a lot of times in those subtleties. They'll say, you are a child of God with infinite intrinsic worth. I was taught that as a Mormon.
Same. Yeah.
But then you're also taught you have to do XYZ things to live with your family again, to be in the presence of God again, to have the Spirit with you, to be in touch with your own, what I now see as your own intuition. And so it's even more complicated because, of course, if we all just walked into church and they were like, you know, I mean, there is some of that rhetoric, like natural man is an enemy to God, whatever. But I guess what I'm saying is it's manipulative because they do serve you. You are wonderful and worthy and God loves you, but this, and this.
There's all of the caveats to those things, and it's not as blatant. It's hard to see it when you're in it.
Exactly.
Right? You just think, oh, I've always known that families can be together forever. Oh, this is wonderful. But it's not that.
Exactly. Yes, because there's terms and conditions. Yeah.
Yep, a lot of those TNCs.
Yes, lots of TNCs in the Mormon church. Thank you for that. We're going to jump into these questions. We're kind of just going to go all across the board. And I think we're going to get, I mean, I have a million follow-up questions, but to your point, I think this will be a really good way to we have the rundown and now we're just going to kind of dig into different pieces of that. Let's start with this one. So this person says, I'm LDS, so they're Mormon, and I feel like a lot of the issues that come from the church is people teach cultural things versus actually teaching doctrine. For example, modesty is taught mostly by the teacher's opinion, not scripture. Do you feel like that's something that drove you away? And I would follow up and ask, what's just your thoughts on that distinction anyway?
I think both are true. Absolutely. There are things, lots of faithful members say things to me like, well, of course, the leaders of the church are only men and they're not perfect and they've made mistakes, including the prophets and all of that. And my bishop would never do this. And the word of wisdom should be interpreted like that. And it's like she said, the cultural things. And definitely being a Utah Mormon is different than being raised in the Mormon church elsewhere or even converting to the Mormon church. For sure, I'm not discounting that. Yes, that's true. There are more toxic and less toxic or traumatic or harmful ways that the culture affects people, and some are practicing in a healthier way from that standpoint. However, all of those things, though any number of them could be reason in and of itself to decide that that's not right or to see that that's not true, none of those things are the reasons why I left at all, not even a tiny, tiny bit. And most of the people that I know who have left the church, they didn't leave for those things either. And the ones who have, when they then find out the actual doctrinal things, then it's like, oh, and then they meet the real anger, like righteous indignation, anger and grief and sorrow and heartbreak, because it is indeed not the cultural things.
Yeah, such a good point. I think the most common misconception about ex-Mormons, maybe ex-religious people generally, is, oh, you got offended. Someone in the church said, someone in the pew said something wrong, but if only they knew that God is perfect and the pastor isn't perfect. God is perfect, but the bishop isn't perfect. I think your point is so true that that's really not why people leave.
Yeah, or like you want to drink coffee and drink cocktails and show your shoulders.
Yeah.
That was mine. Like, it's so sad that you threw away your eternal salvation because you wanted to wear sports bras in public. I mean, it's wild, the things that people snap judge. And yeah, that's not the why.
It's not the why, no. Especially because, I mean, I was thinking about this actually just the other day, because if your eternal salvation is at stake, which it is in Mormonism, you're going to give up wearing a tank top.
Yeah.
You're going to give up coffee. Like,
easily.
If
like,
you're
yes,
if you believe it, right? If you believe that your eternal salvation relies on not wearing a tank top. I mean, I joke about how it's worth wearing a tank top to leave the church all the time, but truly, if you actually believe your salvation depends on that, you're just going to wear the garments. You're going to not drink coffee. And so I think that's such an important distinction to make, which is people who leave the church, we found out that it's not true.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And then, of course, once it's not true, it's like, yeah, then I'm going to drink coffee. And I do also want to say
there is a group of people, especially now, and I really feel like this group is new. And I think it's in great part thanks to brave women like you, but 10 years ago, there wasn't really the demographic of people who drank the coffee, wore the tank top, and then still were totally in on the Sundays. And they just realized like, whoa, this is way too intense. Everyone needs to calm down. I still do believe on the deeper things and everything, and this is my church, but I also know that God isn't actually going to care about the coffee or the tank top. And so they have a more rational like way of being in, but that is absolutely not what the church teaches. And also to those people, I feel like, again, like it's not about that. It's not, they don't know. You don't know what you don't know, I guess is really the best way to put it.
Totally. The last thing I'll say on that too is I think culture and people don't come from a vacuum. So the doctrine informs the culture. It has to. The culture didn't just show up out of the blue. So I think it's really silly when people say, oh, that's the culture, not the doctrine. And the culture of the church isn't perfect, but the church is. And it's like, well, where do you think the culture is coming from? The culture is coming from the doctrine. And sure, there's rogue people that take different things different ways. But I also think of the phrase, by their fruits, ye shall know them. It's like, if you go to church and you find yourself feeling consistently judged and looked down on.
And exactly. And I think it's important to note too that there's the doctrine and the culture and also like the rules, the official rules, because people also like to separate. Well, when we were growing up, you could not have 2 piercings. You could not have a tattoo. You could not watch a rated R movie, period. There's so many things that were very in the Strength of Youth pamphlet from the prophet, from God. You cannot do this. Now I understand that that's been changed again. It's been changed a lot through the decades. And it's a form of gaslighting when they change policies without any recognition of what it was before, without any apology or sense of ownership or accountability of what it was, how that affected so many people. They just say, because now it's like, I'll see people online, it's like, I'm Mormon and I have a tattoo, or I'm Mormon and yes, we can do this, or we can do that, or it doesn't say this. It's, I'm like, but that's now, even like the temple ceremony, there have been so many changes since I left. And I remember someone in my family calling me and being like, this is changing the temple. Like, I thought you'd be so like happy, glad or something. And I was like, honestly, when I listened to a podcast called The Top 10 Changes of the Mormon Temple Ceremony, and that was before these last ones, that was one of the most, I mean, at that point it was exceptionally validating, but one of the most jarring and deeply, deep witnesses that it is not what I once thought it was. Because if it is the temple ceremony, which is the holiest of holies straight from God, if it was that, why would it change based on the culture? Why would it be changing? It shouldn't be changing, right? So it's like the church has changed so much.
So much,
And it's always following the wider culture of the world, if you take a macro level look at it.
Yep.
So, yeah.
Absolutely. The line, I talked about this last week on the podcast, but the line is blurry on purpose. It's gaslighting because they say, well, it's an ever-changing church, and so God gives continued revelation, but also the truth is immutable and never changes.
Yeah.
And so you're always can get stuck in loops.
Yeah, and you're like, which pieces don't change?
Yes.
Because that one was one of the unchanging until it changed.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Let's see. Next question. This is an interesting question. So your son's name is Anderson. So someone asks, did you talk to Anderson about it, or are you planning at some point to do so?
We've talked about it so much. He was 1 when we left, so I didn't raise him in it that he can remember. With most of his family being very, very active LDS people, it's exceptionally important that we raise him with an awareness of so many things. On the one hand, truly to be able to navigate life out of love and respect for the people who we love and respect who are still there, and how to navigate, you don't need to speak about these things, and also how to, just as important, set and affirm boundaries. Hey, if anyone talks to you about this, they shouldn't be. And so tell mommy, or like, you don't have to talk to them about that. And because we also ask and have to demand from those in our lives who are still in that religion that they also respect and act towards love, out of love towards us and our new beliefs. And for us, and this is just, I didn't see the questions that Haley's asking me, but the questions on the post that I posted.
Yeah.
One of the biggest things was like, do you still have family in the church, and how does that even work?
Yeah. Let's talk about that.
I mean, it's changed a lot. You know, at first it was really, really hard. It was really hard. I guess I'll put it this way. I don't have a friend who stayed by my side from my life then. And my family, their hearts were shattered so much that I don't think they were able to see that mine was, in a very dangerous way. My older sister, so I think it's important to note that my family didn't find out I'd left until a year later. And that was foresight from my husband. He basically sat me down, and because I was ready to like march over to my parents' house. And he said, you don't have to right now. And I said, but I can't live a lie. Like, I live what I believe. I've been taught that. And surely like they need to know this, and so many things. And he said, Kels, like, just let's take care of you. Let's just be, you know, gentle with yourself and navigate this together. And we can, you know, navigate that piece later. And then, you know, a couple of weeks later, I was like, wow, yeah, I really wasn't ready. And in fact, we moved after they eventually found out, which was a year later, but I was going to write them a letter. I didn't have the opportunity to do that. Funny enough, I think it's funny now, my older sister called me, and she said that someone from high school had called her because they had seen me out at the Cheesecake Factory with what looked like it might have been a cocktail, and I was wearing a tank top.
Wow.
And so the rumors were rampant that I had maybe, you know, am like struggling with the church. And she was like, that's not, I told her that wasn't true. And I was just quiet. And she, you know, was quiet, and we both started crying. And I actually told her at the time I couldn't talk because I couldn't. I like turned off my phone. My dad was trying to get a hold of me, and I wouldn't answer. We left literally to Houston and moved overnight. I was really unexpectedly not okay.
Right as your family found out.
Yeah. There was so many things that happened that were really, really devastating to me, but I don't think it's productive to share details of that publicly. And again, it's so interesting because I knew what they believed and why they were saying those things, and that they were coming from love, but it didn't make them any less horrific in a sense. And so we left, and we were stayed away for like 9 months. So when I came back, I was like, okay, I'm ready now. We can do this. But my older sister, when she found out, she said to me, I'm angry. And I said, I know, I'm so sorry. She said, no, I'm angry because you didn't know me well enough to know that I don't care, and that you didn't let me help you. Because I was like, it's been a year. Like, people think, you know, it's right now, but it was a year ago. And she's like, why didn't you tell me? And that's the appropriate answer, right? And then after that, we didn't talk about it. She asked me why. And I said, honestly, I can't tell you because it's not my place. I feel like if I told you, you would be super scared and your life would fall apart. And if you want to go down that path, that's your relationship with God, and I'm not going to tell you.
Yeah.
And then we didn't speak about it, and we continued to be best friends and really be there for each other. And it is possible. And now I can say that, you know, almost 10 years later, I have a relationship with my parents that is authentic and real. And it's not what it once was. For a long time, there was a big loss that I had to navigate. But there's been a lot of healing since. And I will say to anyone in this position, it's so important to set and reaffirm boundaries for yourself. To say, hey, like, you won't indoctrinate my children. You want to invite me to a farewell or a church or something, and I'm not going to come, and it's actually out of love and respect for you. And it's going to be out of love and respect for me that you don't expect me to come anymore. So like, setting those boundaries is so hard. It's not always met well, and it might take years before you guys can get there, but you can.
Yeah.
I'd say it was like year 4 where we started to be able to have those conversations. And then now we have a new relationship, And it's far better because it's real. And I can show up to their house in a tank top. And I try, not to use curse words because I just, out of respect for them when I'm in their home. But when I'm in my home, I expect respect for me. Mm-hmm. And, there's ways to navigate it. And it always just comes down to love.
I think as you were speaking, I was just thinking about the level of compassion that you so obviously hold for people who disappointed you, or even, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but failed you in a time that you needed something very different. And I think that compassion, it's such a relatable thing as someone who has left Mormonism, because as you said, even though it is so hurtful and it is wrong, in my opinion, you understand it. And that's why I always say I try and leverage my critiques most specifically at the church, because in my mind, that's the immense negative power of the church, is to make people act, and not make, but to send certain messages that empower people or make people feel like it's justifiable to act a certain way.
Absolutely. And I think it's interesting. Like, I was talking to my mother-in-law just a couple days ago, and she's incredible. She's not like a practicing Mormon. She has been a huge saving grace for me through this. And she, we were talking about, I'm often asked, basically the point is, the fact is, yes, my parents lied to me. They didn't know that. So they're not liars. There's no maliciousness, right? There's no malintent. But the fact remains that the way I was raised, from a million little things, like one little example, I was taught the Book of Mormon is a historical, real book. Those are real people, real things. Even the church, I think, has stepped away from that now. But
I think just barely,
so many things that I was taught are not real. But my parents were still, they didn't know. Again, you don't know what you don't know. And so it's very important, I think, for people on either side of this to realize that, like you said, the anger and the hurt, it's very rarely at an individual, and it is stemming from an institution. And I'm not saying that people shouldn't be accountable for their choices. But I think in general, keeping that wider picture has allowed me to have more grace and forgive without the apology. Yeah. And find my peace. And it's funny because right when I was getting to a place in my life where I was like, okay, I might have to do life. Oh, sorry. Without family, in the sense that I had it before. And I came to peace with that. I'm making my family, I have a beautiful child and a husband, and that's so lucky. And for the first time I had me. And so I was going to be okay. And it was only after I found peace with me that then actually everything else started to heal. And whether it does or doesn't, or whether it takes a year or 10 or never, I think that's the message that I want anyone to hear who feels like their family will never understand or hear them. And in certain ways, my family does not understand or hear me, but that's okay. We found a way for that to be okay, but I will never give up hope. And I think whether they do or do not, you can still be okay.
I think that's such a simple yet profound insight, right? Once you found that peace within yourself, that's when you can, from a place of boundaries and of self-love, start rebuilding some of those relationships. I think that's really beautiful advice. And my heart just goes out to anyone in that situation.
It's obviously, even now, it's still going back there is so hard.
Yeah, absolutely. I appreciate you doing it, because I know that it will be helpful for people who feel that loneliness, and hopefully to feel some hope too.
There's always hope.
Yeah. Okay. This is a really interesting question. Is there anything you miss about Mormonism?
No.
Really?
There was.
Yeah.
There was for a long time. I missed a lot of things. In fact, I went to see the Book of Mormon musical too fresh, maybe a year and a half after I was out, and I was not okay. And I was not offended at that point. I was sad because the part where they have you seen it?
Yes.
Yeah. They that whole parody of Provo and what Mormonism is, before they're going on the mission. That was my real life. Mm-hmm. And I missed that bubble. I missed that sense of safety and surety and all of the it's not real, so you don't miss it in a sense, but you know what I'm saying? So like for a time it was hard. You miss the instant community, but then it's like when I take a step back, I'm like, was that community even healthy or real? Not usually. So, at this point, I do not miss a damn thing.
Yeah, I love that. Wow. Yeah. The Book of Mormon musical. It's reminded me of what you were saying about the Truman Show. That's kind of how it feels to watch that. I actually went to that play by myself, and I was sitting like on the third row.
Wow.
And I almost wanted to stand up and be like, no, you guys, like this happened to me. Like I did, because people,
you served a mission. Oh
because people are watching it and laughing and whatever. But I'm like, no, like this was my life. And now all these people who don't have that same connection, I almost wanted to be like, this is real, you guys. Like, it's just a trippy experience.
I was with like some of my team members from Australia, and they kept asking me like, is that?
Yeah.
And I'm like, this one, no, but this one,
yeah.
Like,
a lot of it checks
most
out.
Most of it, dude.
I know. I actually just this morning was humming Turn It Off Like a Light Switch.
Cute little
Mormon trick. Okay. Ooh, I love this question. What approach did you take to discovering your truth, who you are, your values, aspirations, etc.?
Survive. I do feel like it's interesting because just yesterday I was having a conversation and I was remembering, I was being asked about like that waking up phase of my life. I refer to it now as waking up because I didn't choose to leave anything. I want to make that clear. And I do understand my, kind of Exodus story is a bit weird, but it's really important to always be gentle with yourself and have grace, because when I look back on that time, like when I was so fresh, I had some of my like deepest wounds, like ripped open, and hardest moments, like worst, darkest nights of my life during that time. But also I had such liberation, reclamation. I mean, when you're thinking for yourself for the first time, when you are choosing to get to know who you are, when you realize that like your life is yours, it's all of it. It's the hard, horrible things, and it is the anger, and it is the sorrow to levels that you didn't know were possible, but you just get through each moment. And those are catalysts to this euphoric joy at just being alive that is so beautiful and healing. And so the healing happens all along the way. It's not like you suffer, you grieve, you mourn, you're mad, you're sad, you're mad, you're more sad, you're super mad, and then you're healed. It's not like that. It's all mixed in together. It's always and, not or, even to this day. And so I think like it wasn't a certain therapy. It wasn't a certain energy healing or meditations or exercise, or like I could name so many tools that I've used to help myself become the woman I am today. But really it was just facing my life with my eyes wide open and choosing to keep walking, whether I was afraid or not, and feeling all of it and allowing all of it. And it's pretty beautiful.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that, because I was thinking, I don't know, there's so much to say about kind of rediscovering self and values. But I think for me, as I've gone on that journey and kind of taken steps back, I've realized it's not really that complicated. Like as far as values are concerned, I'm like, I mean, love, service, respect, kindness. Yeah, like that's there. That is. And I mean, obviously, like when you're raising children and stuff, you want to teach those things and talk about those things. But I guess I'm saying you feel really unmoored. But I think at the same time, you realize, to your earlier point as well, like it's all there anyway. I don't need the Mormon church to tell me to be kind, to be good.
They don't have ownership over values.
Not at all.
Of being a good-hearted person. And that's not... Lots of those things aren't really meant to be shoved in that box anyway.
Yes. And those things are not unique at all. No. And I think the sort of panic sometimes people have around, you've left the church, like now you're going to go be this degenerate person.
How will you raise your kids? That was my number one question. How are you going to raise Anderson? Because so many people say they stay because of the values. It's a good way to raise a family. I've heard that more times than I can count. And I'm like, you can have those values and raise your family that way no matter what.
Yep. Yeah. And most people
do.
Are.
Most people are. I think most people on earth genuinely are doing their best to be the best that they can.
Absolutely. Yes, I really love that answer. Let's talk about this. How do you navigate the guilt of not wearing garment appropriate clothes?
Yeah.
It's a big one for people.
It's huge and it's very personal. And interestingly, I had a very powerful experience with this. It was after that initial day when I read everything, I went into this kind of state of numbness. I didn't tell Ryan. He was working full-time and doing school full-time back then. And I was working almost full-time just from home and raising Anderson. And we just were going through the motions, and I was keeping my baby alive, which kept me alive, honestly. And I got to a point a few weeks later where I knew I needed to sit down and read it top to bottom and really face it and finish, because I hadn't finished. I didn't.
The CS letter.
Yeah. And I mean, I hadn't even gotten past the first couple. Little did I know.
Woof. Yeah.
But so I did that. It shattered me again. And I had another panic attack. And I feel like in that moment, I offered probably the most sincere prayer of my life, because I felt insane. I felt like I had borne my testimony, and I'd felt those things. I know that God was leading me in my life and speaking to me. And if that's not real, then I am insane.
What was that?
Yeah.
Then?
And I was just past the shock and more in the free fall. And I remember just crying out. I don't remember if it was verbal or just it felt like every cell of my body pleading with anything. Is there anything there? My whole life was Heavenly Father exists. He loves you. Jesus, these things. And when I was if that's not true, I'm insane. So I was just pleading. And I remember, I don't know how long I was, but I was just in this agony. And then I had this beautiful experience, and it remains one of my most spiritual experiences, funny enough. And I had just felt this warmth, what I would have then described as the spirit. And it just enveloped me. And I felt this peace settle on me. And I felt this, it was like someone was speaking into my head, and it just said, I'm here, or you're here. And all the things that my truest testimony, from my little 8-year-old girl heart to my 24-year-old new mom heart, the things that I bore witness of and felt that feeling from, were still true. And we just said, life doesn't end after this. Families could be forever. Grace, forgiveness, love, all of that still exists. All of that you felt because it is real. And also it doesn't actually belong in that box anyway. And I stood up and I took off my garments and I never put them back on.
Wow.
And that's the day that Ryan came home and he noticed. And that's the day we talked about everything. And yeah, so it was for me, that moment, I think, allowed me to sever a lot of what would have brought me shame in showing my shoulders, in wearing a sports bra, or showing a little bit of thigh, or whatever it might be. For me, I didn't deal with a lot of shame in how I dressed, because I was so empowered in honoring and respecting my body and expressing myself how I feel is true and best and right. And that was incredible for me to be able to do. And I had a lot of shame and judgment put on me from other people, but I was, for me, that piece, it didn't stick as much. Even though it was hard, I didn't care. And honestly, it's I have friends who are devout Muslim, covered women, and they don't shame me the way that lots of my Mormons or semi-Mormons would for what I dress. We both honor and respect our bodies immensely. And she expresses it one way and I express it another. But we're both making our choices out of what we feel is best. And for me, it was just so important to, especially with my massive history of disordered eating and body dysmorphic thoughts and being at war with my physical body from diet culture and all of the things that I'm so open about in my career and why I'm doing this for a career, that paired with this moment, it was wow, it helped me through so much of those self-limiting beliefs as well. Just to understand that this body, it's not irrelevant and it's not something that should be covered and hidden and then given to a man on their terms only if I'm pretty much owned by him. to make babies only. This is my body. This is my soul's sacred home. And it's first and foremost mine. And it was just so electrically empowering for me that I didn't really deal with shame for not wearing my garments.
I think it's kind of what you were saying with your family, right? Of even that boundary setting of you are going to get things projected onto you through all the means that we can get that.
Yep,
but
always.
But you knew, it sounds like you came to peace quite quickly with, I feel right about this. Mm-hmm. And once you feel good about that, it's not that those things can't sting, but I don't think it can touch you in that same way.
Absolutely.
I'm also so glad we got here because especially lately, I just am so interested in the embodiment piece of this and how much Mormonism for me, and I think for many of us, disconnected us from our bodies on so many levels.
That's so sad.
And because, as you were saying, your career is really built on helping people feel at home in their bodies and take care of their bodies, I would love to hear you expound more on how that relates to you to some of these things.
Wow. Yeah. So honestly, it's interesting because when I first started my, what is now, my personal brand page, my Kelsey Wells Instagram, it was back then, it was called My Sweat Life actually. But I began my Instagram not because I wanted to switch careers, not because I wanted a following. In fact, I was mortified of somebody in my real life finding it. Mm-hmm. Almost deleted it a few different occasions once they did. I was in this spot in my life and I so desperately needed a place where I could exist and people didn't ask or care what religion I was. And I could connect with like-minded women and share what I was passionate about. And I had a year prior been navigating very severe postpartum anxiety and my mental health was at a big low after I had Anderson on that front. And I had a very powerful experience when I fell into that because for the very first time in my life, I began exercising out of an effort to help myself and my body heal instead of out of hate for my body. That was my first time doing that at 24 years old as a new mom. And that was so empowering and that blew my mind. And I had no knowledge of exercise or fitness or nutrition. I thought that you exercise to punish yourself, to shrink yourself, or if you ate what you thought was too much. And then I thought that eating healthy meant starving yourself or extreme fat diets. Less is the goal, right? Mm-hmm. And so this point, I was unlearning all of that. And my mind was just blown with the power of caring for your physical body. And that enabled me to understand that it was worth taking care of. And these things were never a problem for me because what I didn't see then was that as a devout Mormon, I knew that I hated myself in my head, but I did not think that that was an issue. Because if I was doing Mormonism perfectly, then Jesus loved me. I was saved. My family was forever. I'm living that's eternal salvation is the goal anyway. So this is my cross to bear. Nobody should feel like that. We are not born into this life hating our bodies, feeling like we're not enough, that we don't measure up. Self-love is innate. Self-loathing is learned. Through millions of bold-faced and thousands of tiny little white lies through media, culture, whatever it is, magazines, the fitness industry, and so many other things. But I was realizing, wow, that's not what it is. My body, I wanted to be strong for the first time. And I worked for that strength and I worked to be strong of mind. And then I looked at my son and I realized oh my God, the thought of him speaking to himself and thinking of his self and his body the way that I was shattered me. And I knew how could I teach him not to do that if I did that? So that year between becoming a mom and losing myself, I spent building a foundation of healthy habits for the first time in my life, exercising with the right intention, fueling myself with more nutrient-dense foods, eating without shame. I was learning that I was worth something. And I used to say when I started my career, I was very open with my postpartum mental health struggles, but obviously I never talked about any of this. And I would say fitness saved me. And I was never able to speak to the depth of which it really did, because in those days, that's when I met what depression feels like. And that's when I understood how it feels to not want to be here. And I truly believe, because at the time, obviously I should have been in therapy. I didn't believe in that. I thought talking to someone professionally would be a big failure. I thought taking any medication would be a huge failure. And so it was those little habits that I had implemented for the year prior that I just continued to do. I continued to go through those motions. I exercised still. I fueled my body still. And those little habits like tethered me to who I am. I didn't know that I was doing this such important foundational work to be able to weather what I was going through without professional help. And it was the love of my husband and the existence of my son and these tiny habits that got me through every day and allowed me to like see who I am. And so I'm so passionate about helping humans redefine fitness, because like I said in the beginning, our health isn't separate, and you cannot hate your way into loving yourself. You cannot buy confidence, or you can do all the physical things, right? And you can change your body composition, and you're still going to be miserable in your head if you're not dealing with what's actually going on in here. And these are things that unfortunately, like, men and women both have been so bombarded with. And the ways fitness have been packaged and sold for decades is so toxic and so wrong and so backwards. And so here I am just trying to like say, hey, movement is intrinsic to life. And whatever you believe in, whatever religion you do or do not subscribe to, you are worthy. You are worth it. Who you are is not a mistake. You are worth taking care of. And when you do care for yourself and your multifaceted health, you'll be okay. And not only okay, you will be able to live your life in not only a way that you deserve, but how you were born to. And I do think that everyone is here has a purpose.
I feel like we could do episodes upon episodes about this, because very similar to what you were saying a couple years ago. So I was pretty newly out of the church. And yeah, I had done all the things that you described of like running, just how many calories did I burn, that type of thing. And I am now so passionate about fitness and just those things that you described. And I've never thought about it how you said, but I was just thinking there's so many connections, so many. But even with the garment thing and covering up our bodies, and with Mormonism, there's so much of this feeling of like you said, it doesn't really matter if I love myself. It doesn't even really matter that much if I'm happy. And I think in stepping away from that, I didn't realize how connected that is for me with my fitness journey of being like, I deserve this for myself because it makes me feel good. And I deserve to feel good, not look good, feel good. I'm so glad we got to talk to this piece of it, because I do think it's hugely connected. And I think that that's kind of the key piece that I've been missing of how it felt so connected to me, is that now I do feel worth doing that because of how it makes me feel.
Yeah. And you deserve to walk through life with confidence. And confidence is really self-trust. And it actually doesn't have anything to do with how we look. It's like, do we know that we can trust ourselves? And the reason that usually that goes so hand in hand, or it can go so hand in hand with like a fitness journey, like a physical fitness journey, is because what are you doing? If you are on a fitness journey, you are consecutively, again and again, showing yourself, I'm doing what I said I was going to do. I'm doing this workout. I'm drinking this water, whatever it is. It's so important that we are aware of the motive for our movement, because that is the one thing that dictates the direction that our progress is putting us in.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you for speaking to that piece of it. Okay, so someone wrote in and asked, is it hard to look back and not feel manipulated or concerned for other kids in that same situation?
Yeah, it is. Because you just get to a point where you realize that it's tough, right? It's tough because on the one hand, there is I feel like daily I'm torn, because I do understand how some people's faith journey might lead them into that church and some might lead them out. And I do want to honor people wherever they're at on their journey. But also if you zoom out, knowing the depth of what I know now, the institution itself, it's not good. And it is harmful to many groups of people on a very real and literal way. And so I do struggle with that. And I do want to say, I think awareness is what is key to those who are still in. Probably not many people who are still in are listening to this, but here we go. And I also saw some people saying things like, how do I navigate, if I have friends or family who have left and I actually do want to be there for them. I would just say, like, for yourself, for your children, I would plead with you to educate yourself. And I'm not saying that in like a degrading way at all. I'm saying from the sincerity of my heart. If everybody that I loved in my life who was devoutly Mormon went and read the full CES letter, not the little essays on the church website that they think that the church has kind of made people think addresses the issues within that letter, because they do not. But if you actually sit and receive this factual knowledge about the religion that you're in, and you sit with that, and then you make a decision to still stay, you will stay differently. And you might be able, I can't imagine staying, but if you did choose to, I would respect you. I'm going to respect everyone no matter what, and you would be able to respect those you love who have left on a much deeper and real level. You won't hold the fear around them that you innately feel talking to them. You won't feel inclined to shame them for their decision or pity them. You'll be able to sit with them and say, I'm proud of you. And if you choose to stay knowing what you know, you can raise your kids differently in this religion to hopefully negate the types of traumas that you might unwillingly bestow upon them if you don't know. And so I just think awareness is the key to all of this. And I would never tell someone what they need to do with their life. And honestly, I honestly don't even have the right to say this because I didn't choose to look. I never had to decide. Back then, there weren't even people leaving at all. I didn't even know a person who had left. And so it was like, or heard of one. So I didn't even hear whisperings of like, there's issues that you shouldn't look at. Like I didn't anything. And so I've never known how scary it must be to like have to choose to look deeply into something that might alter your life in literally every way possible. And so I'm not, again, saying this with judgment, but I'm saying from my decade of experience and my whole life in the church before that, and someone who loves so many people in the church, become aware.
Yeah.
And then honor yourself from there.
Yeah. I think about the concept of informed consent. And I just think everybody should be informed.
Yeah.
And if you are informed and then you're consenting because you're choosing to do the Mormon thing, that's very different than what I feel like my heart aches as well for many people I know and myself who did so much for something that I wasn't informed about.
Yeah.
And I think informed consent is so huge in this context. And I think, yeah, that's a really important thing to emphasize is everybody deserves to be informed, especially about the thing that they're dedicating everything to.
And it takes such bravery to, in this case, to do that, but you will not regret it.
Yeah.
And also in this day and age, the fact is, one day you'll probably find out anyway, like I did. If you're a parent, the odds are that your children will bring these things to you at some point.
Yep.
Do you want to be prepared or,
Yeah, it's so true. And that's another really, really huge thing about your story is so much has changed since you left the church.
It's wild.
It's wild.
Yeah,
Even
so
from
cool.
your family perspective, there's resources now. There's Mormon therapists who talk about it.
To find a family who has all members faithfully in.
Yeah, it's not really a thing anymore.
Yeah.
So yeah, I feel like that was just probably so different on all sides of it. Okay, maybe let's end on this one. I think this is a good note to end on. So someone asks, where do you find yourself now spiritually? Mm-hmm. Are you weary of labeling yourself now?
Honestly, I feel I am no longer religious. I do not subscribe to one single organized religion. It's been, a long time, and I've gone to, non-denominational Christian churches. Like I've went to a place where I almost veered atheist. Like I've been all over the map. But at this point in my life, and for the last while, I feel more spiritual and closer to God than I ever have. And certainly than I ever did when it was under the guise of fear, which I didn't know it was under the guise of fear in that religion. So though I'm not religious, I feel very, very in tune with who I am. And though I don't know specifics technically of the names of the heavens that I may or may not get into, or exactly, where I'm coming from, where I'm going, I know that I am a divine being having a human experience. And I know that I am worthy, and I am here, and I'm free to be heart-led. I'm not sure what I call that, and I don't care because it doesn't matter.
Mm-hmm. As you were talking about your values in response to that question, I was thinking about the freedom too in, not having to have a label and not having to have, I just think there's so much evolving that happens once you leave an organized religion. And then there's this understanding that evolving is constant and it's beautiful and it should be embraced. Yeah. And not to detract, I think we all come to certain knowings that are even more valuable and important to us. But I also just think, the way that you described your spirituality now is so different than thinking about when I was Mormon. My spirituality was, I know Joseph Smith's a prophet. I know the Book of Mormon's true. I know that the Mormon church has the right. Exactly. Yeah. And that kind of thing just feels so irrelevant now.
Yes.
And what you just said is the relevance, right?
And I used to hold so much fear of any of that being shattered or even scratched. And now it's all been shattered to oblivion. And instead of panicking, there was that, but there is just joy. And there's actually a deeper knowing, like a seated, intrinsic peace in the not knowing.
Totally. I feel that too. Something that someone else asked as I was just looking through the questions is, does it get easier? And I feel like you've spoken to that just through your story, right? And I think you're just a testament to that. One of the really beautiful things about you opening up now is, more so, or at least to the level of anyone I've spoken to, and I've talked to a lot of people now, that was really heavy, really, really heavy. And again, I just want to encourage people to listen to your episode, The Day I Died, about it, because I feel like you speak so well to that heaviness. But to see how that's changed now and where you are now, I think is just so hopeful, because I do know that there are a lot of people who listen who are in the depths of that heaviness. And I think, your story is just really hopeful for people who are in the thick of it.
Thank you. And that's the hope, right? I just, everything you feel is valid and you'll get through. Mm-hmm. There's so much good and joy.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Kelsey. Seriously, like I said, I'm like already planning our next episode. I'm gonna make you come back, because I feel like there's so much more we could dig into.
I'd love to.
Especially with your expertise, like we were talking about around fitness and all of that. But I just feel like this was so wonderful.
Thank you, Haley.
Yes, thank you. I learned so much from you. I love you too. Thank you so much for being here.
I'm honored.
And thank you everyone for listening. Bye.
GIRLSCAMP, it's Girls Camp.
This has been a 58 Ember production. For more shows, please visit the 58 Ember channel, 58ember.com, or find us at 58 Ember Media on socials.